As I see no requests for the floor, I take it that there is no objection, and the resolution is therefore adopted.
Okay, now bear in mind that this is a virtual meeting, that many of the countries are not represented there. So we saw that endorsement on the floor. Let's go to Sarah Wheaton, who's the senior health reporter for Politico. She joins us out of Geneva. Sarah, this is impeccable timing for you with this motion just having been passed. What do we understand about what has now been agreed to?
Well, it's a broad measure about what countries think should be done in response to the coronavirus. So it calls for a lot of different things. And one of them is about investigating the broad response to the coronavirus. And the phrasing about the timing is rather interesting. It calls for the WHO to initiate an investigation at the earliest possible moment. And it'll be very interesting to see the debate going forward, because some countries like the U.S. have signaled that they really think this needs to get going as soon as possible, whereas China made very clear that they don't see this being appropriate until after the pandemic is passed, which could be years from now. The resolution also calls for looking at a better understanding of how the virus kind of made it to humans in the first place. That's sort of code for looking at the origins of the virus. And it has some other controversial measures that did make their way through, such as considering vaccination against the coronavirus a global public good, which will put pressure on countries and companies to make the virus and sort of the method of producing it widely available.
So in all of that, as you say, some things that have made it through, particularly around whether it was passed through animals and the timing, do you think China has had to make concessions here?
It's unclear. We have seen China really try to align itself with Europe and the rest of the world. We really saw a fascinating schism that has been playing out for a long time really come to the fore here in Geneva, of the U.S. basically abandoning its role as a global leader. The U.S. has been the biggest donor to the WHO, and in general, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control have kind of always been in charge of managing these responses, even if officially the WHO is in charge. And so now we saw Trump saying, WHO, we think you really messed this up. We don't even necessarily want to be a member of this organization anymore. China, on the other hand, yesterday announced a lot of funding for the coronavirus response and to help poor countries rebuild their economies in the aftermath. They also said that they would consider any vaccine that comes out of China to be a global public good. There have been a lot of questions about whether China would share a vaccine, and they are kind of in the lead as far as developing some of these potential candidates. And in general, we are seeing China, at least rhetorically, align itself with Europe and other countries around the world that are supporting the WHO. Of course, there's a lot of wiggle room in all of this language, and so we'll be watching very closely to see what China actually does.
Yeah, so how much debate is left in this? And as you pointed out there's this intensifying war of words between the US and China. How do you think that's going to impact the rest of the day's discussions?
Well, the rest of the day's discussions are sort of it's countries performing for themselves a bit, but we're curious to see how the WHO will respond to Trump's move. They canceled their press conference that they were planning to have today at the end of the session. Unclear if that's because they need to figure out a way to respond to Trump, or just because the session is running very long. But in general, all the kind of behind-the-scenes discussions that would normally be happening at a major diplomatic gathering like this are just not, because everybody's speaking over video connection from their homes or offices the way you and I are today.
Indeed. And do you think the WHO, as you say, because of the US's absence to a degree in this discussion properly, because of the threats, is being accountable enough through this meeting and through the investigation that will then take place?
This meeting and the virtual nature of it does make it more difficult in many ways, but certainly the WHO has been in touch with many world leaders and leaders from countries like Australia and European leaders are sort of in a tough spot because the reality is they don't really trust China and they're not happy with China's level of transparency, and they probably would have liked to have seen the WHO be a little more forceful. But on the other hand, they don't think that funding should be cut for the WHO. The WHO is really the only venue that we have for this sort of global response, and so they want to show this support while still finding a way to hold China accountable.
Really fascinating developments. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.